Hey y'all, and thank you so much for joining me for another episode for The Talk with Almost PhD Ambi. That's me. Continuing with this overarching topic of identity, we're going to take it all the way back to childhood. Just thinking about when you were a child and your identity as a child, or even for those of you out there that are parents or caregivers, or even teachers, babysitters, really just everyone. This is for you because someone was a child once upon a time in their life. Thinking about children, one thing that we know, a child is always going to keep it a buck, y'all.
I'm a savage.
They will be honest with you whether you like it or not. I think about my niece, 8 years old, who thinks that she's my age, and she literally told me the other day, you know, Auntie, acrylics are bad for you. Like, you need to just go ahead and get press-ons. And she ended up sending me a link for press-on nails. Now, she's not completely wrong. You know, acrylics can be bad, but I've been getting my nails done for many, many years before she was ever even thought of. Shout out to my nail techs. And so it's just like, little girl, if you don't get your minds off of what I'm doing about me and my nails and my hands, please mind your business. They're always going to just tell you exactly what it is that's on their minds, or they're going to be completely honest with you, whether you like it or not, sharing their most unfiltered, uncensored thoughts. Thinking about that, we might call this the id complex when it comes to psychoanalysis. For those of you that don't know, psychoanalysis was a theory that was originally formulated by Sigmund Freud, and many of you may have seen it in different movies or TV shows. You end up seeing the Rorschach inkblot personality test with the different cards and saying, what might you think this is, or what does this look like to you? Or people laying down on a couch and spilling out their unconscious feelings to their therapist.
Then I saw her big, round head on Tony's body. It was horrible.
Now, granted, we do still do the Rorschach. Scoring that is the nightmare of my life. But as far as people laying down on a couch and doing therapy, that's maybe not as common anymore when it comes to more new wave therapy, so to speak. Just thinking about psychoanalysis, there have been many different waves of it. It has become a lot more culturally competent, as many other different theoretical orientations have become. It is a lot more explorative in today's day and age. Just going back to the id and thinking about the id complex, it is metaphorically seen as this very unruly, unfiltered, impulsive child. We're going to use that for this particular example. Then we have the ego. So the ego is seen as this mediating figure, or some people might call it like the traffic cop. And then you have the superego. So the superego is seen as overly moral, or other people might say that it has remnants of a judge.
Order in the court.
Within this complex, they do typically all three live within one person's mind or within one person's body, and they're all supposed to really work together. So at times in different situations, we might be a bit more impulsive or kind of have our id coming out, or at other times we might be a bit more moral or have our superego coming out, or we might just be the mediating figure in a situation and we have our ego coming out. For the purposes of today's episode, I want us to keep the id as the child, and then I want us to actually have the superego as, say, some kind of parental figure or caregiver, and then we're going to have the ego as that mediator in between, so that can be, say, an older sibling, or even a babysitter, a teacher, an aunt or uncle, like, you know, the fun auntie like me, any type of mediator who may have some type of influence on the child, but they can also have some type of influence on the parent as well. And so within this particular example, The it is, or the child for this particular example, they're always just going to be sharing their unconscious, unfiltered, uncensored thoughts. And one thing I do want to say, quick disclaimer, no, I am not a parent. I am not going to get on here and tell you all how to be a parent. I'm not going to judge good parenting versus bad parenting. This is not a parenting podcast, it's a psychology podcast. Clock that. I do realize that there are also different cultural backgrounds which may influence how you discipline or parenting your child. You know, whether it was the way how you were raised, the different demographic that you might come from, your socialization, different belief systems that you have. I also acknowledge that and understand that as well. But a lot of the times when different children are sharing their uncensored, unfiltered thoughts, it is typically going to get shut down by that superego or by that parent, especially if they feel like it is inappropriate or in the wrong setting or around the wrong people. And this doesn't have to just necessarily be thoughts. It can think about going back to that cognitive triad, even though right now we're talking a little bit about psychoanalysis. I kind of like to integrate, thinking about if they're sharing different thoughts, if they're expressing different emotions, or if they're exhibiting different behaviors. And if you feel like as a parent, it is inappropriate at that time and place, or just inappropriate in general, you're going to automatically shut it down. The child in that moment may feel a certain type of way about that, right? A lot of the times we have the ego, the mediating figure. This might be a teacher, a babysitter, a sibling. They might try and console the child at that point in time. They see that that discipline maybe hurt their feelings a little bit. Or they might try and have a talk with the parent. Maybe you could have went about that in a different way. Or, you know, maybe you should listen to what the child had to say or just pay attention to how they were expressing themselves. So that might end up happening in that situation. But what I really want us to focus on when it comes to just identity and specifically within childhood, when children are sharing their unconscious, unfiltered thoughts, that is when they are being their most true and authentic selves. For children, a lot of the times, that is pretty much all the time, unless they get socialized to do otherwise or conditioned to do otherwise. And those are just fancy ways of saying taught. I want us to think about this in a sense of, say for instance, a child is continuously saying, say a young child at that, they're talking about sex or some type of sexual relation. The parent is probably going to automatically say, you know, stop talking about that. Stop it. What are you doing? No, like you don't know anything about that. They're automatically getting shut down. And you know, granted, for a young child, that is seen as inappropriate. They shouldn't know anything about that. And the ego in this case, or the mediating figure, they might want to look a bit more deeply into that. They might begin to ask the child, yeah, that is inappropriate, but where did you hear that? Or how did you hear about that? And I mean, also, you have to think about the child's environment. Children are either at school, some type of extracurricular activity, or at home or around family members the rest of the time, right? So they're also sponges, they absorb everything. And that is something else that is very important to think about because they're either going to learn it from their social environment or from their home environment. And so it's like, where exactly are they learning this information? When that mediating figure asks them, where did you hear about that? How did you learn about that? The child might end up saying, my uncle, who I go and stay with sometimes, like he has sex around me and he has sex with me. That is something that is imperative to pay attention to because now we're looking into the realm of this child They have been trying to share those unconscious, uncensored, unfiltered thoughts, emotions, behaviors, whatever they may be, time and time again. They have been shut down. But then when they were probed and asked about it, now this is a potential case of molestation and or even rape in some extreme cases. That is something that is very serious, especially if it's coming from a family member. Going back to what I talked about last week when it comes to core beliefs, if the child has been constantly shut down by that superego or by the parent, by that authoritative figure, constantly dismissed, constantly ignored, they're going to start to form these core beliefs of, I'm unimportant, no one cares, I'm unheard. They might start to form different views of other people, like people are bad, people want to hurt me. And then they might just form a view of the world like the world is dangerous, right? This ends up influencing their cognitive triad, which is their thoughts, their emotions, their behaviors, which they are trying to express, but they are getting shut down. This ends up formulating a child's self-identity. And a lot of the times, the way how it is formed in childhood is going to be carried on into adolescence and then later on into adulthood. Those messages that you're sending them or how you're either reinforcing or not reinforcing it is extremely important, just as that parenting figure. Within that, it ends up being how exactly are you handling these particular situations. Say that this child ends up sharing this particular case with you and you actually do listen to them, then they can start to really form a better sense of self. You can end up investigating the situation and they can start to think, okay, you know what, I actually do feel heard, I am important, maybe there are some good people in the world that care about me, maybe the world is not such a terrible place. Now I know, we just got super dark, so let's try and lighten up the room again.
I can see clearly now, the rain is gone.
Move away from that, but that is definitely just one type of particular situation where I wanted to just bring that to you all's attention. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be something that's that negative and dark. You know, it can be a situation where your child is expressing their super unfiltered, uncensored thoughts, like being extremely talkative, and it's just because they want to be a super lit podcast baddie like me, duh. Just always being very, very mindful of what it is that your child is trying to get across to you in their own way. And then the next thing that we automatically think about when it comes to a child forming their identity is, what do you want to be when you grow up? The one question that we have all had asked us. And I know for me in particular, my answer was a model. I swore I was going to be the next Tyra Banks. I was always walking around in my mother's heels, my sister's heels. As soon as a camera came out, I'd strike that pose, hand on the hip, I was ready. So that was something that I was sure I was going to do. Once I started to notice the persistence that you had to have with the lack of pay, I really realized, like, yeah, you know what? Maybe this is not going to be the field for me. And that's so hilarious to me because instead I chose to be in school for 20 plus years and be tenacious in that way and still broke anyway. So yay, I'm such a winner. Also back in my day, you couldn't be my height and be a supermodel of the world. You know, I couldn't be 5'3.5" and be a supermodel. But these days you can be on Instagram and be anything that you want to be. So again, I'm such a winner. Can't you see it on my face? So just thinking about when kids get asked, what do they want to be when they grow up? A lot of children might say police officer, an astronaut, a doctor. You have all of these different answers, or at least those were the answers back in my generation. I know these days kids want to be TikTok influencers and actresses and rap stars and whatnot, all the fun stuff. That brings us to Albert Bandura's social learning theory. And this is the idea that basically children are going to end up forming their identity and socializing their identity based off of imitation. For instance, if a child wants to be a police officer when they grow up, they are going to start to imitate those behaviors. So they're probably going to start to walk around saying, you know, freeze, put your hands up, you're going to jail. They're going to like fake arrest you. You know, they might start to get really interested in maybe wearing a uniform or cop cars or even guns and things that cops have to carry around, different policies and procedures. So that is something else that is very important to think about, because within social learning theory, thinking about that imitation, a child is going to be socialized in that way, and they're going to really start to imitate whatever and or whoever it is that they are trying to be like. Even if they want to be like their favorite celebrity, what exactly is it that that celebrity is doing on a regular basis? And thinking about, is this positive? Is this negative? Are there positive behaviors behind it, negative behaviors? And really just starting to pay attention to that socialization process, because it is something that forms a child's identity, and it's something that they really start to believe they are as they get older and grow into adolescence and then later childhood. The main takeaways from this episode, think about what is it that your child, whether they're your own or someone in your class, someone that you're taking care of here and there, what is it that they are trying to share with you unconsciously, unfiltered, uncensored, whether that is a thought, whether that is an emotion, whether that is a behavior that they're expressing? And what exactly does that mean when they're sharing these different things with you or in front of you? And really trying not to automatically shut those behaviors or emotions or thoughts down, just trying to understand it a bit more. And then also thinking about that socialization process. Your child is growing up in front of you every day, and really just paying attention to, okay, what type of behaviors are they imitating? Not saying to be a helicopter parent and literally hone in on, no, you can't do this or you can't do that, or you have to be this when you grow up. I realize that there are certain cultures where you do have to be a certain thing when you grow up. None of my business. I am not a parent. Keeping in mind how we socialize our children ends up being how they formulate their identity moving forward. And so I want to thank you all so much again for joining me for another episode, and I'll see you all next time.
Just like